Laurie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Let's start with the one word open. So let's start with give us your one word open before we dive in. I know we have a lot to talk about. So what is your one word that you want to open up with today?
Sure. I guess that one word would be author, which is what I consider myself. And I feel really lucky to consider myself that.
Awesome. Well, take the next few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. Tell us about, who you are, what you stand for, what you do, and, what books you've written. And then we'll kind of dive deeper on that. Go right ahead.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Laurie Woolever. I have, for the past couple of years, been working on books since my former boss, Tony Bourdain, died in 2018. When he died, we were working on a book called World Travel, an Irreverent Guide. And it was meant to be a travel guide to all the places that he had been in the world through his television shows, No Reservations and Parts Unknown. And it was meant to have a lot of essays and a lot of sort of more behind the scenes stuff from Tony. Unfortunately, he died fairly early in the process of our starting to write that book together. So I was left to finish it and to figure out how to bring a lot of Tony's voice into it with him, unfortunately, no longer being around. So that came out in 2001, published by Echo, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. And then in the same year, last fall, we published Bourdain, the Definitive Oral Biography. And that is pretty much what it sounds like. Although a lot of people go, what is an oral biography? I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. And it's not there is an audiobook version, but it's not strictly an audio recording. It's a collection of interviews, pieces of interviews that I did with about 80 people who knew Tony Bourdain and all aspects of his life, from his late mother, his ex-wives, ex-girlfriends, his brother, his daughter, people he worked with starting in restaurants in the late 70s and early 80s, all the way up through the end of his life as an author and a television host and producer. So it was a really comprehensive look at his life, told through the stories of the people who knew him best. So that came out last year, and we've just released it in paperback this year. So it's kind of back on people's minds. And I've been really pleased to see people continuing to engage with the story, with the legacy of Tony Bourdain. I was fortunate enough to also work on the documentary that was made about him that also came out in 2021, and that was called Roadrunner. It was a story about Anthony Bourdain. Really beautiful film, really a lot of the same themes that are in my book are also in the film, but I was fortunate to have the space and the format in a book to really flesh out the themes a lot more profoundly and with a lot more detail included in the book format. So, working as Tony Bourdain's assistant for the last 10 years of his life really kind of defined my career as a writer. It is not easy to make a living as a writer. And up until the time of his death, I thought, well, I'm not sure I can do this, as I don't know if I'll ever be a time where I can simply support myself as a writer without having some sort of a day job or a side gig or even just doing writing that isn't personal in any way, but pays the bills. And I still do a lot of that, a lot of copywriting or marketing copy that's never going to have my name on it, and really is just about supporting a brand. So that's where I'm at. I've just sold my next book, which is a memoir of my time working in and around the restaurant industry in New York for the last 25 years. And I've also just finished working on co-authoring a book about sourdough baking, which I'm really excited about. And that's with the baker Richard Hart, who a lot of people may know. He was the head baker for 6 years at Tartine in San Francisco. And I know it has since expanded into LA. And then he left and went to Copenhagen and opened his own bakery, Hart Bakery, under the auspices of the Noma Group with the renowned chef Rene Redzepi of Noma, which is a world-renowned restaurant and restaurant group. So it's been my privilege throughout my career to work with really some of the top people in the food and beverage space and learn from them and get really incredible opportunities to be creative.
That's awesome. I always love speaking to people that are up to remarkable things like you, which is really incredible. I would love to hear if you could share with us. I know we've all, we've seen Tony on TV, read the books, but you got a chance to travel with him, and you really got a chance to see who he was, and all that good stuff. So can you give us a little bit a little color into that, like who he was as a person off camera, and
Mhm.
your experience with him and all that good stuff? Whatever you're comfortable sharing, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, the great thing about Tony is he was, very true to himself, whether the cameras were on or off. He didn't have sort of a, big guy persona that he would turn on. Of course, he understood what was required of him on camera. He certainly, brought his A game and he brought his charisma. But really, when the camera's off, he was still telling stories, being funny, getting really excited about new discoveries. I was lucky to go to Tokyo with him in 2016, and I had never been there. He had, of course, been there a number of times. And we took a train across the country, across the mainland of Japan from Kanazawa, which is sort of a lesser known seaside city, and across the mainland to Tokyo. And so as we were waiting on the train platform to take us, and of course I had never done that either, taking the bullet train, the famous Shinkansen train, which I was just incredibly excited and kind of overwhelmed. And I thought, well, I got to play it cool because, Tony's seen everything and he's been everywhere and I don't want to look like a rube. And suddenly he gets this look on his face of sheer excitement. And he's like, oh my God, they have the greatest thing here. I have to show you. And what he's so excited and running down the platform to show me is a coffee vending machine, which is if you've been to Japan, it's a very specific thing that we don't have here in the States, and probably for good reason. It's not great coffee, but it's kind of cool. You can get a hot cup of coffee or a hot can of coffee really from one of these machines. And of course, vending machine culture is just so advanced and weird and interesting in Japan. And it was just this little simple thing that he could still find so much excitement and joy over, and so much willingness to share it with someone who's never experienced it before, even when there were no cameras around, nobody was shooting. It was just the two of us getting on the train. And while he was running to this coffee machine, he was pulling change out of his pocket, and his train ticket, which was a paper ticket, fell out of his pocket. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy is famously, the most experienced world traveler ever, and he can't hold on to his train ticket. If I was really glad to be there to kind of grab it up, and, because once the train comes, if you don't have your ticket, that's, sorry, that's $200 gone. So that was a really interesting, just a little thumbnail into, okay, he's a human being, he's fallible, he's excited about small things, regardless of if there's cameras looking. And he was really generous. He was really generous with me as an employer, giving me opportunities. He knew I was a writer. We had worked together on his first cookbook, which was called Anthony Bourdain's Lay All Cookbook, starting in 2002. So he knew me as a writer before I ever was his assistant. And he understood that I wanted more than just to make reservations and make sure the cars showed up on time and, do the emails and all the things that an assistant does. And so he was really generous about setting me up with opportunities to better myself as a writer. We co-authored a cookbook that was published in 2016 called Appetites. And that to me was just such an enormous opportunity to put my own name on the cover of a book alongside his name, and to understand everything that goes into not only making a book like that, which I had done before, but the promotional machine around something with a name like Tony Bourdain attached. It was a real education in media, publishing, business, all of ego management. Honestly, for me, that really defined my relationship with him. Was always giving me good opportunities, really generous. I was always learning from him. And, it's the great shame of my life that he's not still around to be there as my mentor as he was.
You'll definitely be missed by all of us. And when you're speaking to the travels and your experiences with him, I've had a lot of memorable, episodes that I saw him on. And one that immediately pops in my head is the one that I forget what country he was in, and he ate, and then he went to get massages, and they were just beating him up, like holding his elbow back here and then lifting it and then standing on his shoulder in the back. and he was just, it was brutal. I'm like, oh my God, how is he breathing through that? So I'm sure you remember, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
So
it was probably Uzbekistan. I think that's where he got the most kind of brutalized. And I think it
yeah,
was probably played up for comedy. And I think there was also a pretty intense massage in Finland. So,
mm,
you know, the Baltic countries, the former Soviet countries, I think they take their body work very seriously, and it becomes almost an act of violence.
yeah, it was so intense. I'm like, oh my God. So, and it's like once you see that, you can never unsee it, you know, and then it just
Mhm.
it was top of mind for me. So I wanted to, we were talking before we started recording, you were talking about what's happening with his legacy on Twitter. If you could kind of speak to that, that would be wonderful as well.
Absolutely. You know, I, like many people involved in media and business, I look at Twitter all the time. And last night I happened to notice that his name was trending, you know, and it was like, well, what's this about? And it turned out someone had made one of those prompt questions that are very much, designed to get maximum engagement. And it was, which celebrity death hit you the hardest or was the most devastating to you? And far and away, the answers were Anthony Bourdain. Of course, there were others, Robin Williams and others, but there were enough Anthony Bourdain answers to make him trend. And it's just been this really interesting experience for me as somebody who worked closely with him, who's, you know, I owe a lot of my career success to him, and I'm continuing to make work about him. That I see his legacy really changing over. And I think it started the day he died. There was this lionization of him, which I think he probably would have been embarrassed about and would have tried to disavow and shy away from, because I think he was always careful not to have a messiah complex or to be perceived as somebody greater than he was. He was ultimately he could be an egomaniac, but he had a core of a humble core. But his, between my books and the other books that are out there and the film and just this sort of all of his television work continuing to live on in our new, streaming, because it's not new anymore, but our streaming world, he's starting to cross over and to be more almost of a symbol or than a man. You know, people are, really projecting mostly really positive things onto him, people giving him a lot of credit for giving them the courage to travel or quit their jobs or go to culinary school or just explore more in their own neighborhoods. I think especially during COVID when we really couldn't travel, I think there was this real spirit of, well, where I live might be kind of interesting too. And why don't I go check out, that bar across town that I never bothered to go to, or get in the car and drive an hour away and see what's, who I might meet in the next town. And I don't think Tony can take 100% credit for that, but I think the type of travel content that he was making throughout his career, I think really changed the game and opened people's minds to what travel looks like, to what the possibilities of travel are, that it's not all just high-end resorts and golf clubs and cruises. And those were the kinds of things that were really being covered in the media up until the advent of Tony. So I think his legacy just sort of continues to expand as the years go on. And it's very heartening for me that he hasn't been forgotten, that he's not just someone who sort of flamed out and blew away. I think people continue to find wisdom in their own strength and their own direction from looking at his body of work.
Yeah, well said. And thank you for your contribution with his legacy and everything you've done and you're going to continue to do. I know you were on the Joe Rogan podcast not too long ago, and you were talking about your new book. So I would love to hear if we could hear a little bit of insight into that, and then let us know how, where people could go to purchase it and your website address and closing. That'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. So the book I was talking about on Joe Rogan last year was Bourdain, the definitive oral biography. And it was just coming out in hardcover then, and it's out in paperback now. It's gotten a really great response. We hit the New York Times bestseller list the first week it came out, and the paperback has now hit the LA Times bestseller list. So it's always really gratifying for an author, and also for all of the other people behind the scenes who work so hard to put a book together. It's as much a thrill for them, I think, as it is for me to see that, the fruits of your labor hit the bestseller list. So that's available, obviously, wherever books are sold. We have what I think is a beautiful oral audio version of it, where I'm reading parts. Many of the interview subjects also read their parts. There are a few cases where we had to hire voice actors, but for the most part, it's the people whose voices are in the book are actually the ones that are reading in the audio version, and that was a whole production in and of itself. And then in the interim, I have just finished the first draft of a sourdough baking book, which I mentioned at the top of the hour. So that's the publishing is a long process. So that is not quite ready, but look for that in the coming year or so, a book with Richard Hart. And I'm now starting to write my own memoir, and I'm looking for that to come out probably at the end of 2023. So a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon.
That's really wonderful. I wanted to have you sign us off with a one-word close, but before we do that, I wanted to personally say thank you very much for this meaningful conversation, and sign us off with that one-word close.
Oh man, patience. I'm going to say patience. I've had to have a lot of patience with myself. I have a teenage son that requires a lot of patience, and being a writer is nothing but patience with the process, with yourself, with the reader. So
Awesome. Thank you.
all right. Thanks very much.